A busy weather Sunday across the United States. We have gloom and doom in the Northeast and in the northern mid-Atlantic states, particularly along the coast, not so much well inland. Beautiful weather across much of the South. Severe weather breaking out today ahead of the season's first winter storm in the Northern Rockies. And the long range, I think, is pretty interesting, too, on a number of levels. We're going to check out that, the tropics, a few other things, all of that and more. Where else on Sunday morning but on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which is, of course, as we all know, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York. It's Southwest Suffolk County on Long Island, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area with everything you need to get you through this coming winter, and that includes rock salt. They are not only Long Island's largest rock salt provider, but if you are outside of Long Island, you could drive in and pick it up, and still got plenty of mulch and topsoil, and of course the supplies you might need to get through adverse weather this coming winter. 631-756-1125, the telephone number for the best prices not only in town but anywhere in the tri-state area. And the website is
OmniTrueValue.com. Good morning, Joe. I opened up my Sunday newspaper this morning, and on page 1, the headline read, "This may be the last time we change our clocks to standard time."
Oh, God. We have to get used to a European that comes out at 2 o'clock instead of at 1 o'clock. Now, although I have to say that given that the European to me is no hasn't been premier in a long time, it is so I'm not really as anxious to look at it, but still, you have to wait that extra hour.
Well, my peeve is that, and it's happening right now. I mean, I woke up this morning at 5 minutes after 7 and looked out the window, and it was still fairly dark outside. I know that at that point in time, we were in what is known as civil twilight, and civil twilight means that you can actually conduct your daily business without the need of turning on your car headlights and whatever, but it was dark this morning, Joe, and it's going to get even darker when the morons in Washington, D.C., and yes, they are. I mean, what is a politician? Does a politician know anything about science? I'd love to know, get like 20 high-ranking politicians and be able to go back over their college or high school records and find out how well they did in science, general science, earth science, or whatever. They're morons, Joe. They're idiots. And this all has to do with science. And back in the early 70s, some dum-dum in Washington said, "Hey, we have an energy crisis. Why don't we have daylight saving time extended into the winter and make for lighter afternoons? Wouldn't that be great?" And everybody said, "Boy, that's a great idea." Except they didn't realize that by doing that, they would make the mornings darker. And literally within like a month, not even a month after that plan was implemented, Florida was the first state to be literally begging Washington, please, change it back. And why? Because many young children on their way to school were being hit by cars because it was dark, and the cars and the buses didn't see those young children when they were trying to cross the street or when they were trying to get on a bus or other, and it was terrible. It was horrible. I forget who the person was, Joe, who said this, but somebody in history said that if you don't look back upon history and what had happened in the past, you're likely to go through it again. And indeed, what's going to happen is exactly what happened 50 or so years ago. We're going to go back to daylight time year round. The mornings are going to be dark. The kids are going to be going out to school. Some of them are going to be hurt. Sadly, some of them are probably going to be killed. And it's all because of the stupidity of extending daylight saving time, because it didn't dawn on people that by moving the clock ahead 1 hour, yeah, your afternoons will be a little lighter, a little brighter, but the mornings are going to be dark. And where you are, Joe, I think you're at longitude 80 degrees west or thereabouts. For you, daylight saving time will force the sun to stay below the horizon in early January until sometime around or soon after 9 o'clock. You're going to have darkness until around 9 a.m. in the morning,
Tell me.
thanks to daylight saving time. Incredible.
No, tell me about it. Yeah, the ones that are closer to the people who live closer to where the time zone changes are going to be in for a rude awakening when it comes to that. The original premise for moving it, keeping it year round was this sort of idea that you would save energy by doing that, and it turned out very quickly that that was not the case.
No, it was not the case at all.
In fact, you actually use more energy by doing it. Then you're going to have. I'll make this prediction. You're going to have some of these border places, like here in where I am in Georgia. You're going to have some of these border states saying, well, you know what, we need to switch to the central time and go back an hour. But that doesn't really do anything necessarily, because then come the summertime, they're going to be arguing it the other way when it's light here until 9 o'clock in the evening. So it's so ludicrous. It's just so silly to just go back to standard time. Let's just go back to standard time and just leave it there. I guess you could some of us all listen to the two curmudgeons, the two old men over here. Mark my words, I think you're correct. There's going to be screaming, but particularly in the big cities. Yes. You're going to hear people screaming about the fact that my kids are going to school in the dark and all the rest of it.
There was a radio station here in New York. I forget, it might have been WABC or WPLJ. One of the radio stations actually used to have contests where the winner would receive a flashlight. And I think one of the disc jockeys said, look, if you don't use it to lighten up the sidewalk when you're sending your kid out to school or whatever, you can use it as a weapon in case you get mugged. I mean, that was the running joke back then in the early 70s. Yeah. But that's going to be it's going to happen again, friends. I will stake money on this. It's going to happen again. The people are just simply not going to realize, and the people who are told that this is going to happen, oh, I could live with it. I could live with dark. No, you can't. No, you can't, because when you realize that when you're heading out to work, that you're going to have to sit in your kitchen, and normally, even in the darkest of winter mornings, you don't need your lights to illuminate the kitchen. Now you're going to need the lights, and now you're going to have the dark, and you're going to get in your car and say, "What is this? I don't want to travel." It's like it's terrible to drive to work. And I still remember taking a Regents exam in the dark. It was like 7:45 or 7:50 in the morning or whatever, and the sun was still below the horizon. And I'm looking out, and I'm saying to myself, I feel like I'm in night school. This is crazy. It's psychologically, it puts a spin on your mind as to what's going on out there. So let them do it. Let the politicians get their way, and they'll think that their constituents will love them for this. Let them go ahead and have daylight time year round. It will be gone. Year-round daylight time will be gone within 2 years after it is implemented. And if it's going to be implemented next year in 2023, I guarantee you that by 2025, no later than 2026, it will be a thing of the past. And then we'll just wait another 50 years until another bunch of politicians come along and say, hey, how about having daylight saving time all year? It's just going to be a continuous, non-ending cycle that's going to take place. Oh, well.
Oh.
And yes, we are going to get our beloved computer information, the model guidance will all be coming in an hour later than we expect them to come in during standard time because of the implementation of daylight saving time. And all of you people out there who are like, what happened? What is the latest guidance coming in on that big snowstorm? Are we still going to get it? Are we still? Sorry, we can't. We have to wait another hour because the NAM and the GFS and the Europe, everything is coming in an hour later. So hold your water.
Right.
It's coming in. It's coming in an hour late.
So
Huh.
David Scott asks, in the summer season, would anyone expect morning temperatures to warm any slower? So let's clarify a couple of things. But actually, the question brings up just something that people aren't aware of anyway. Um, I just always got a kick out of the fact that people seem to think that by doing daylight saving time, it's not savings time, by the way, it's saving time. It's singular, not plural. But by doing daylight saving time, you somehow magically get an extra hour of daylight. You do not. It's the amount of daylight and the amount of darkness is exactly the same however you decide the measurement parameters are going to be, whether it's Greenwich Mean Time or whether it's an Eastern Time Zone or Central Time Zone or Mountain or Western or Hawaiian or whatever. So, but it does as far as the actual recording of numbers in terms of highs and lows and everything else, and the hourly temperatures, they are broadcasted to you locally in local time, but the Weather Service measures them and logs them in on Greenwich Mean Time. Okay, so it's not going to really change what the lows and the highs were. Okay, granted, if the sun rises earlier, you're going to see your temperatures bottom a little earlier on your standard clock time, but it doesn't, it's six of one, half a dozen of the other. It makes absolutely no difference. And of course, we want to remind everybody, since we're on this subject, that regardless of what time we are on, whether it be Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time, the Joe and Joe Weather Show is always on Monday through Thursday at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time, regardless of whether we have daylight saving or not. And just make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. See, I could turn this into a shameless self-promotion, Joe. the Subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn the notifications on. This way you get notified every time the Joe and Joe Weather Show is on. And by the way, we should remind everybody also that Sundays we do our show at 11 a.m. and Fridays and Saturdays we usually take off unless there is a storm brewing. But you're right. We should go. Michael Reyes says we should just go to Greenwich Mean Time world and just be done with it and be on one standard clock. But that's never going to happen. So unfortunately, so let's go from there. We've got gloom and doom is settling into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states today, Joe. But the rain is just offshore on the radar, starting to move its way inland. But it doesn't look, at least at this point, I guess it depends on where you are. It looks like any kind of steady or heavier rain is going to be southern New England, maybe Long Island, and southeastern New England, and lesser amounts as you go west.
Right, and the big question among local sports fans, although maybe, just maybe, the Yankee fans out there may actually be hoping for a day off, a rain out, after what happened last night.
Oh.
They said, let's settle back and wait a little while. Although the Major League Baseball, there's another thing. Don't get me started on that. The way they have jammed this schedule together, crushed it, so this way, they can get as many games in as few days as possible. A rainout tonight would be semi-disastrous to the overall schedule of things. But nonetheless, the question, Joe, on everybody's mind, or at least the Yankee fans and baseball fans' mind, is: will the rain tonight preclude the ball game being played tonight at the big ballpark in the South Bronx?
Well, I think that's going to really depend on the radar. If we take a look at the satellite loop, you can see the clouds from off the ocean, are streaming northwestward up into New England now, and the western edge is in eastern Pennsylvania. You can also look off the North Carolina coast, southeast of, say, Wilmington, or east of the South Carolina coast. There's actually a little low-level swirl, a little circulation there, but not tropical. But we do have this feed. Look at There's a pretty interesting feed here of moisture coming out of the Caribbean, Joe, just kind of streaming up into the Atlantic. And if you just extrapolate straight northward, most of that moisture seems to be going towards southern New England and Long Island. A little bit, it right now also arcing back up into the coastal New Jersey. But some of that tropical moisture a little bit further to the south, that's going to get. I think that's going to get in there. There might be some decent rain. Southeastern New England is still trying to get out of this drought that they're in. Parts of southeastern New England. I think they should. They may wind up here with the most as far as rainfall is concerned. Maybe an inch. Maybe some places could get an inch and a half and soak right into the ground. And meanwhile, between what's in the east and then back in the Rockies, there's this large area of the United States where the weather today is absolutely spectacular.
Yes, and regarding tonight, my feelings are that the Bronx, the South Bronx, will probably pick up less than 0.2 of an inch. And since this game is so important, at least to people who are in Houston who want to see a championship tonight, my suggestion not my suggestion, but my thoughts are that what we're going to see is a game that will be played, albeit in light rain, and it really will not be enough to postpone or cancel the game. It will not be the best of conditions, but again, they're kind of locked into this schedule. They really have to get that game in tonight. So there you go. What they're going to do is they'll probably play, but it will probably not be in contrast to yesterday. Yesterday was absolutely gorgeous, a beautiful afternoon and even early evening for fall baseball. But tonight, again, as you say, Joe, gloom and doom, cloud-filled skies, and again, some of that rain that's moving into the area from the south and the east will be with us through the afternoon and evening hours.
And you look at the radar. I got the wide radar view here. There's some heavier echoes just offshore, but they're moving northward. So at the moment, whatever you see on the radar here in the lighter blue and even in the lightest green is probably not reaching the ground. At least when I looked at the 10 o'clock observations, that seemed to bear that out. You have to get into those darker greens to get anything that is reaching the ground. Probably a little patch there in southern Monmouth and Ocean County now, back to, well, maybe to Burlington County in New Jersey. But for Long Island, those darker greens seem to be heading right for the South Shore and should be there in another hour or so. And even you see on the radar the yellow echoes here with some heavier downpours. They look like they might move into eastern Long Island and eventually getting into coastal and eastern Connecticut, Rhode Island, and some rain now also getting close to Cape Cod and the islands in southeastern New England. We also have, where the low is, some heavier rains moving into eastern North Carolina and over the Outer Banks. But it doesn't look, we can't see on the radar far enough what's going on just offshore. So maybe, Joe, they'll get lucky with all that heavy rain band going east of New York City, that the amount of rain that falls will be minimal this afternoon into this evening. There probably will be some more bands coming up for tonight. Meanwhile, take a look out in Montana, where, oftentimes we look out here when we look at the mountains in the Northern Rockies. A lot of times the precipitation, because of the mountains, the radars don't always look that impressive. But I noticed yesterday that the radars were very impressive up in the Northern Rockies, and they actually remain so today. They're getting their first winter storm of the season in parts of the Northern Rockies.
Well, it's that time of the year. Now, a little, you get into September and something like this would happen on occasion, and you say, what the heck's going on here? But now, here we are. We're into late October. And I mean, heck, even here in the tri-state area, we've had significant snowfalls, rare as they may be, in late October. And we're talking now out in the hill country, the high terrain of the northern plains and the Rockies. So, yeah, here we go. We're starting in, and away we go with the upcoming item. I remember, if I'm correct, there were places out west like Denver and Chicago and Minneapolis that set records for the latest in the season that they saw significant snowfall. I don't think, I have a clue, Joe. I don't think that's going to happen this particular year. I think that the snows are going to come, the snows are going to arrive, and it's going to be a lot earlier this year as opposed to what we saw last year.
And I've got the Weather Service digital snowfall forecast map, and most of one of the problems with I would hate to be a forecaster out in the Rockies because you got to deal with the mountains and you have to deal with the valleys and the shadow effects that go on. You see these ones and twos and three numbers in terms of inches that are being forecast for some places, and then you go a handful of miles onto some mountain and you got double-digit amounts. Now, this, by the way, these numbers here do not include anything that has fallen after that fell overnight last night. So this is on top of what's already on the ground. But we're seeing additional snowfall amounts of generally 2 to 5 inches in most places, even extending down into western Colorado and parts of New Mexico getting a little bit of snow. Same with parts of Utah. Some big snow amounts being indicated in the mountains to the east of Seattle, where we've got a 41 print. I don't know exactly what that is, where that is. But we got 2 and 3 foot snows being indicated in the mountains of Washington State. So this does to me go down on the books as the season's first winter storm. And you see on the watches and warnings back from the Weather Service, we've got winter storm warnings up for parts of western Colorado, much of eastern Utah, into northwestern Wyoming, and a good portion of Montana is either under winter weather advisories or winter storm warnings that extend into the westernmost counties of North and South Dakota. So first one of the season, and usually, Joe, the first important snowstorm of any of winter seasons usually happens somewhere in the west rather than in the east. This is pretty normal. So snow lovers should not get upset that there's a snowstorm in the west in October, in late October, because that's kind of normal for them. It's not normal for the east.
I've always said this. For those who want to become forecasters, meteorologists who want to delve into the forecasting end of things, it's really important to have behind you a lot of empiricism. In other words, you have to the skater, the champions Olympic skater from all those years ago, whose name suddenly escapes me, but she said, I had to fall on my tush hundreds of times before I finally got it right, and I finally were able to perfect all of my movement. Dorothy Hamill.
Dorothy Hamill.
Dorothy Hamill, and she created the Hamill camel that's spinning on one leg or whatever. But she said, I fell an awful lot of times, and the same thing is true to be a good forecaster. You've got to blow a few forecasts, and you got to, but you learn by your mistakes, and I think that's even more important out where you said, Joe, out in the plain states and the Rockies, because there are such divergencies between, seeing a little snow versus a lot in the mountainous terrain areas, and you have to live out there. You literally have to live out there and learn over many years' time until finally, when you have learned, then you can become a very good forecaster. You don't necessarily look just at the model guidance. You work off of your own knowledge and your own, again, empiricism to what is going to happen. And the same holds true here in the Northeast to a lesser degree, I think. But that's important. I mean, you just simply don't become a good forecaster or an excellent forecaster when you come out of college. You have to make your bones, so to speak. And after 5, 10, 15 years, then you've settled in and have learned enough so that you can make good forecasts, not just by looking at and Joe, we've seen this. We've worked with young people who've come out of college and just automatically accept what the guidance models say. You can't do that because the guidance models in some cases are wrong, sometimes dead wrong. You have to adjust using your own knowledge and your own capabilities, a little of the human mix into the machine mix, and that gives you a good forecast. And you need that, especially in cases like what's going on right now out in the West, out in Montana and Wyoming and portions of the Dakotas. You need to have that to make a good and reliable forecast.
And I noticed the WPC doesn't put out. They don't have like they do with liquid precip. They don't have a corresponding snow map that shows, say the 1 inch, the 2 inch, the 3 inch in their forecast. Mainly, for that very reason, and that is that you have so many microclimates to have to consider when it comes to snow. And I mean, you do with rain, but with snow, it's just that much harder to predict. And this is the probability. I'm going to just take it up to a probability of at least. Well, this is at least 2. So the reddish areas are 80% or higher, and you see how they play out. This is for the next 72 hours, by the way. I'll jump over the probability. Let's go to probability of 4. And the blue areas are 40% or higher. I often find that that's a good using that 40% line is usually a good standard to use when you're forecasting. If you're in that 40% or greater area for greater than 4, that's a pretty good indicator that you're going to wind up with something close to 4 at the very least. And you see how where it sets up across eastern Montana, some patchy areas in Wyoming, some patchy areas in western Montana, and the probability of at least 8, shrinks down. Again, you see small areas of 40% or more of at least 8. And again, this is on top of whatever has fallen overnight and early this morning. The rainfall forecast for today, this is day 1, so this is from today through Monday morning, the liquid precip forecast, I should say. Now, for the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states, you see the sharp cutoff in western New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania, where we're talking about 1/100th to at most 1/10 of an inch, and the dark green is 1/4 of an inch. And WPC's got it in southwestern Maine, much of New Hampshire, western Massachusetts, the Connecticut-New York state line to about New York City, and then down into southern New Jersey, west of the Parkway, but not too far west of the Garden State Parkway, and then just sort of touching a small portion of Delaware. But look, inland, there's nothing. I mean, you just go west of that sharp cutoff line, and it's bone dry all the way down into the southeast of Florida and west into the lower Mississippi Valley. You see what's being produced over in the west. And then for the next time frame, which is now Monday morning into Tuesday morning, most of the rain shifts eastward into northern New England, particularly into Maine. And then you've got precip that's getting gelled up here in the southern parts of the southern plains and in the lower middle Mississippi Valley. Some of these areas are very dry. The Pacific Northwest and on up into the northern plains. And here are your 7-day rainfall totals. So kind of a busy period here with precip across much of the U.S.
Yeah, yep, and it's I guess it's too bad if you really want to play. Now, the other game that will be of importance, aside from the Yankee game, is the Philadelphia Philly San Diego Padre game. That's being played in Philadelphia, and so the precip, the rainfall is going to be for today is going to be important for that game as well. And it looks like, Joe, the rain that is coming up from the south and trying to push to the west, Philadelphia looks like it's right on the edge of that area. So Philadelphia, too, may have to deal with some precipitation. That game is not this evening. That game is this afternoon. So basically, we could see both championship series wrapped up today. The Phillies up 3-1 against the Padres. They could wrap it up in Philly this afternoon, and the Astros could wrap it up at Yankee Stadium tonight. Again, weather conditions permitting.
So let's go to the long range, which I think is actually, next couple of weeks. When I have the 10 millibar map, Joe, that we might be talking long range here that snow lovers might enjoy. And a couple of things that have been pointed out to me, hat tip to space specialist for reminding me about this. But we've had a number of, we talk about during the winter months when the polar vortex gets a disruption and it winds up either weakening or rearranging itself, or on occasion it's split in two. Well, there have actually been, and this is I think this may have implications down the road. There have been several disruptions of the polar vortex already. Normally, this time of year, this thing is just strengthening. But these warm air disruptions that are coming in have kept the polar vortex weaker than it otherwise would be. I think this may have implications as we go into the winter months. Now the frames you're seeing right now are over the weekend, and I'm looping ahead through next week and beyond. And the one thing I noticed, Joe, is that this vortex really, in a time frame where it should be strengthening, really doesn't strengthen very much at all. And it's pivoting around in a way that suggests to me that we might have an interesting month of November. The flow wants to be, at least in the stratosphere, if you just kind of, I always use the idea of following the flow. There's troughing here in the stratosphere in the eastern part of the United States, and you've got, a pretty strong upper ridge building up into the Pacific Northwest. This interests me. This interests me in terms of the implications long term. I said this back a couple of weeks ago. I've said it a couple of times. I'll say it again. With the kind of pattern we had in October, if it extends into November, that doesn't mean, by the way, that it's going to be cold all the time. There are going to be ups and downs, obviously, as troughs pull out and new ones come in. But I'm going to stick to the idea that we may see some early action in the eastern U.S., particularly in the interior areas. We might see some early wintertime action here during the month of November, based on what I'm looking at.
Based upon that, if I may use the unmeteorological term, that bagginess, if you will, along the East Coast, which seems to suggest some kind of a trough that's trying to develop and establish itself along the Atlantic seaboard.
Yeah, and there's been a this has been going on. We've seen it pretty much since we moved into the fall season. We've seen troughs want to be in the eastern part of the United States. I don't think, I don't see anything that changes. And take a look. We haven't done the teleconnections in a while with these disruptions, because we haven't really been paying close attention to it. But look at what the NAO did back in the middle part of October, timed out right around the time that we had the deep trough that was with us all of last week. Right in here. Look at it. The NAO took a big dip negative, and it's been struggling to get back to the neutral line. And in fact, notice that after this coming week and beyond, you've got an awful lot of members here, Joe, that want to take the NAO negative
south again.
Yeah, and by not an insignificant amount either. I mean, there are members that are above that, obviously, because you see where the mean is, but the mean is negative, and there are a lot of members that are more sharply negative than the mean. I'm sticking to this idea that we might see some early action in November sometime.
So you're saying that while you're not putting it in cement, so to speak, or not saying that it's actually specifically and will happen, but what you're alluding to is that we may see, before the month of November is over, the first measurable snowfall maybe in parts of our area. That's certainly a possibility. I don't think we had that until January of earlier this year.
Right.
It was so very warm during the month of December that just, and you remember, Joe, last December, it was while I was I was down south in Antarctica, and of course we were doing Joe and Joe from all the way down there. I was, and there was a couple of days in mid-December of last year, early December, I think it was around the 7th or 8th or 9th, where people were getting excited because it looked like there was going to be a major, not just a snowfall, but a major snowfall that could dump like 8, 10, 12. Never did happen. never did happen. But and December overall ended up being just just unseasonably mild for all, and we really did not see anything major in terms of snow until after the first of the year. But what you're implying here with this unusual pattern shaping up possibly for November is possibly maybe a significant snowfall before the end of November.
I think it's possible. I honestly I do. November snowfalls don't happen very often. Certainly at the coast, they don't happen very often. Every once in a while, yes, but um, inland it might be a different story. Look, there are a couple of wild cards here that we have to talk about. Uh, One is, I think, an important wild card is going to be the Western Pacific tropics. Are we going to see another one of these recurving typhoons east of Japan? Because when they recurve east of Japan, and more importantly, they not only have to recurve east of Japan, but then they have to go northeast toward the Aleutians or toward the Bering Sea or the Gulf of Alaska and energize some kind of deep upper low in that position that drives a trough down to the longitude of Hawaii. Because when you get that, that corresponds to a ridge in the west and a trough in the east. And oftentimes, oftentimes when you're looking in the long range, and we all know how models like to put big storms. Sometimes they like to put big storms on there, but sometimes they don't show them. And then suddenly in the short range, you've got a tropical storm someplace where the models didn't really pick up on that. So I think that's that's going to be one important wild card going forward, is watching the Western Pacific. The other thing is, and I'll bring it up on the screen now. While we were talking about the NAO, one thing that is not where you'd like it to be, if you're a snow lover, is the Pacific North America Index, or the PNA. And that would correspond to when it's positive. It means that there's troughing, generally that means troughing in the east and a ridge in the west. When it's negative, it's the other way around. Well, the PNA is right now is also negative at the moment, and this kind of explains the warm up now that this trough is pulled out. You see how positive the PNA got earlier this week and late last weekend with that deep trough in the eastern part of the United States. You had the PNA shot up. Now that trough's pulled out, it's dropping down and going negative again. I mean, it's not very negative. It's close to the neutral line. You do have a lot of members that are above neutral. You do also have a lot of members in the long range that are below neutral. So the question is, are we going to get that? We may get troughs dropping into the east, but if we don't get them with strong ridges in the west, that's going to limit how much, if any, cold air can come down. So this is another wild card that we're going to have to see how it plays out in terms of how the upper air shapes up. I just feel though we're going into this winter in a different sort of way than how we were going into the last several winters. It just seems to me that the whole pattern this fall is different. We didn't get an extended summer. I'm not talking about Indian summer. I mean, that's just not, in a sense of, I don't want to say it's nonsense, but it's not important. You could have that all the time. But we've had a number of years where we actually had stretches of above normal temperatures lasting well into October, and even into November before autumn arrived, quote unquote.
And may I ask also, is the term Indian summer now politically incorrect to say Indian summer? I'm not really sure anybody has done
I haven't heard anybody say anything much about it.
So we could still say Indians. So in the same way that we could still call them the Atlanta Braves, we can still call an unseasonably warm spell of weather after the first frost Indian summer. By the way, I looked over the records at Central Park, and on average, we get significant or measurable snow at Central Park in November roughly 3 times a decade. And in fact, Joe, both of us can remember the last time that happened And boy, was that significant. That was that snowstorm on the 15th of November in 2018 that dropped 6.4 inches of snow in Central Park and as much as 10 or 12 inches in some outlying areas. That was, by I think, the all-time record for snow in New York City, at least in recent years. So we usually get like 2 or 3 Novembers out of 10 where we get enough to shovel. And actually, there overall, I think in November you get 5 or 6 years out of 10 where some form of snow falls. I mean, a trace of snow, one that doesn't accumulate to any degree, but you could step outside and look up and say, "Oh, look, it's snowing. I see a few flakes falling," and it might be November 17th or whatever. But that doesn't amount to anything. But to see snow accumulate in November, yeah, happens only about 20 or 30% of the time in at least in New York City in a typical decade. And again, the last time it happened was back in 2018, where we had over a half a foot, believe it or not.
All right. And the other player, as we mentioned, was we were talking about the tropics here. I don't know if you've noticed this, Joe, but I've been kind of following this since late last week. This is the umpteenth run in a row where the GFS has shown a Category 4 hurricane going into Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic or the Virgin Islands sometime in the beginning of November.
Right.
And it's still showing it. It's interesting to me now that we're now inside the 7-day time frame, and it's picking up on what looks like a tropical wave that moves over the southern windward islands, and then once it gets into the southeastern Caribbean, it blows up. And the reason is, and I've got this map that I'm using here shows wind shear between the levels of, say, 5,000 feet all the way up to about 30,000 feet. This seems to be in its own ideal environment for strengthening, with excellent outflow, excellent inflow, and a nice solid upper high way up in the atmosphere that's sitting over it to provide a mechanism for good outflow. And it hasn't backed off very much. I think on one run it backed off a little bit, but once again on the overnight runs, we're seeing what looks like the potential for a major hurricane. Now, again, this is we know how I like to look at these things, that if it's inside the 7-day time frame and it keeps advancing, the time frames get shorter and shorter. We're inside the 7-day time frame, so my eyebrows are kind of, they've been raised. When we get inside the 5-day time frame, then we kind of know that something's going to probably happen. But again, impressive to me that it's showing this. And with everything that's going on across North America in the coming next 2 weeks, it'll be an interesting thing to watch if this winds up being reality. The European model with regards to this particular system is not showing much of anything. Okay, the Icon model has a weaker system, as does the I'm bringing the Icon up now. Not enough of the new run. Let's see how much of the new run. I mean, it does show something. There it is. Okay, so now, Joe, this is at day 6 now. And this is also coming in. You can see it's got a weaker system there in the southeast Caribbean. This is for next Saturday. So you're getting a little bit of confirmation from some of the other models. The Canadian model last night also has a weaker system down there. The GFS seems to be going hog wild with this as far as intensification is concerned. Again, I'm not going to get too worked up over this until we get far deeper when it gets much closer. But it's been shooting it out for the better part of a week now that there's something's going to happen down there, and it doesn't want to let go.
Well, while we're talking about the tropics, why don't we take a gander at what's going on not in the Atlantic Basin or the Caribbean, but out in the Pacific, because we have a whale of a storm that is threatening Puerto Vallarta in Mexico and that is Hurricane Roslyn, which I haven't taken a look, Joe, but I think at last look last night, it was up to a Cat 4.
Yeah, Roslyn is inland now.
Okay.
In fact, if we look we go to the U.S. satellite because you could see it pretty well there. So there it is on the U.S. satellite. Roslyn is well inland. I think it went in as a strong Cat 3, and moving northeastward. Believe it's let's check to see what the Hurricane Center's got with this. Instead of just talking off the top of my head, it was one of the things I did not check this morning. Roslyn moving inland over, so it just moved. It's 22.8 north, 105.0 west. Top winds were 90 miles an hour, so actually it went in as a borderline Cat 2, or it is a Cat 2 now, moving northeast at 20, and you see the track into the mountains. Some of that moisture probably is going to wind up getting into South Texas there as it moves northeastward. They're still carrying as an identifiable depression as it's approaching the Texas border. So, but at one point it did get to almost a Cat 4, I believe.
Well, it was a Cat 4.
Okay.
It was, as of yesterday evening, it was a Cat 4, and it was moving northeast. And a lot of people who were, and the funny thing is that you say to yourself, well, it's Mexico, but there are a lot of Americans who have moved to that part of Mexico to get away from wintry weather and have actually settled in that part of Mexico. So it's a lot of folks from the U.S. who live down there, and they were having some interviews with people via, let's say, I guess Zoom or Skype or whatever, and they're saying, I didn't anticipate something like this, but I'm concerned. I don't know what I'm going to do, and blah 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 blah. So hopefully, those people down there did not suffer too much from the landfall of Roslyn last night and early this morning.
I'm also looking. I just shifted over to the Western Pacific, since we mentioned that. In the Western Pacific, the GFS anyway does have a tropical storm that is it's well east of the Philippines, and that becomes a typhoon, which it takes east of Japan. This is in the longer range now, just going back to that whole upper air pattern across North America. But you see it right here, just in case you're not sure what what I'm talking about here. This is right here. It's this particular system, and when we run the loop, you're going to notice that it holds an identity going northeastward to the Aleutians. It gets down to a 944 as it approaches the Aleutians, which of course at that time it's an extratropical system. But this is the kind of thing that you got to watch for, that it could energize some sort of upper low out in the Gulf of Alaska or in the Aleutians and create a deep trough. Again, you get the deep trough that's out in the longitude of Hawaii that makes a big ridge in the west, which makes a deep trough in the eastern part of the United States. And if I switch to the upper air, you'll see the back of a deep trough in the long range in the east. So there's you kind of get, it's not the best looking trough in the world here, but you do have troughing that comes down toward Hawaii. You see the ridge that gets popped up. This is, this is 12, 13 days from now. The model showing another one of these deep troughs in the eastern part of the United States. So things to keep an eye on there in the longer term. And meanwhile, let's go back short range because we got weather going on. Look at that, Joe. Isn't that a nice looking 500 with this for Saturday, November 5th? And there's the GFS. There's the GFS with the hurricane coming out of the Caribbean and over Puerto Rico and passing close to Bermuda, with another trough dropping down into eastern Canada in the longer term. So it's interesting start to the month of November if that tropical system does become an issue. And checking out the weather going forward, some of the things to look at this week. Let's roll back. We should point out, by the way, that there is severe weather risk tonight let's bring it up. SPC does have a slight risk of severe weather in a narrow band in eastern Nebraska, northeastern Kansas, western Iowa, southeastern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota. Uh, and then for tomorrow, it's got a slight risk in Texas, in eastern and southern Texas, and western Louisiana, southwestern Arkansas. And for day 3, it's got another area of slight risk. Oh, I might get some rain. Yippee.
Yeah.
I mean, Joe, it's rain here on 2 days in the last 2 months. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. Uh, Slight risk of severe on day 3, which is Tuesday into Wednesday, over Mississippi, northeast Louisiana, and eastern Arkansas. So here's what's going on. So here's your coastal system, the inverted trough that doesn't want to go away. I don't know, Joe. We might be doomy gloomy here tomorrow and maybe even on Tuesday. With this onshore flow kind of hanging tough. I know Sal Blandino right now is doing backflips. Okay. But I'm sorry, it is what it is. And there's your deep storm in the Dakotas with the snow lasting into Monday morning before it pulls up into Canada. Then you get another low that forms on the southern part of the jet here in Texas, and that moves eastward. So there's your severe weather threat that's pushing east. I don't know how much sun is the northeast and the coastal northeast and mid-Atlantic going to see for the first half of this week. May not be much.
Why don't you check the 700 to 300 millibar moisture field and see if we're in the brown, which would suggest dry weather and maybe some sunshine, or if we're in the blue, which would suggest quite a bit of cloud cover.
One moment.
One moment, please.
Please enjoy the music while your map is being accessed.
You have to go all the way. It's like at the bottom of the list there,
yeah,
Joe.
I got it.
There you go.
So here's today, and now here's Monday. Starts to dry up a little bit on Monday, but right along the immediate coast, though, you see from southeastern New England over Long Island, it's a bit of a struggle into Tuesday, and then you see some improvement, later Tuesday into Wednesday. But what if it's below the 700 millibar level
right.
that remains moist? Then
could be like a low cloud cover. Yeah, exactly.
And I think you have to be careful of that. We may just have to wait till this low that moves into the middle Mississippi Valley Tuesday night and clears a cold front through, that we finally get some genuine improvement here at all levels, say Thursday and Friday, and maybe even into the start of next weekend.
Well, I think by next weekend, when we do our Joe and Joe show next Sunday, I think that the thing that we're going to be really keyed into, if indeed the GFS has been correct over the last several runs, will be that potential tropical system down near Puerto Rico, the Leeward Islands, perhaps, and whether or not that thing truly is revving up. And right now it's showing that the storm is going to pass to the north and then move off to the northeast, away from the U.S. coastline. I'm not saying that's going to be a problem for any part of the Atlantic seaboard, but one other area that might need to worry would be Bermuda, if the storm takes more of a westerly track, if indeed it does develop at all. So I know we're coming to the end of October, and normally we don't talk about major tropical systems. Well, I mean, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of Sandy, and Sandy hit on the 29th of October. So whether or not next weekend we'll be talking about another significant tropical system, not for us, but for some other location, that'll be something that will be certainly keyed up and watching. And I should also point out, Joe, that that Sandy was October 29th, 2012. On October 29th, 2011, we had an unusual major snowstorm here in the Northeast, and I, right here in Putnam Valley, got 14 inches of heavy, wet snow. So this is a rather curious time of the year. You still can have summertime tropical activity of significance, or you could have activity which takes us into the dregs of winter. So a most unusual time frame that we're moving into, and we'll be watching that carefully over the course of the next few days, and especially next week, right here on the Joe and Joe Show.
And by the way, the Hurricane Center does have something on their tropical weather outlook, but um, out in the Atlantic that's moving westward. If you look on the loop, you might look at this and say, oh, it looks like this elongated area of clouds that they're talking about. Actually, what they're talking about is to the north of that. I've been following this along the last couple of days. Just to the north of it, right in here, there's this low level, there's actually a low level circulation that is moving westward. It's got a little bit of thunderstorm activity with it, but not very much. It's a very tiny system. And this is moving westward, and somehow some of the moisture that's to the south is getting involved in all of this. But yet, when you look at what's happening, particularly in the upper air, once that system is that, which is going to continue to move to the west, considering you're looking at these clouds from the Bahamas moving straight north, so the flow across the subtropical Atlantic is actually east to west. It's pretty far north to be doing that, but it's going to eventually run into some strong upper level winds that are going to prevent this from developing. But it's that really tiny, that teeny tiny itsy bitsy system that is just to the north of that band of clouds that's moving westward that the Hurricane Center mentions in their tropical weather outlook. And I'm not really overly bullish on development with that, which means that by this time tomorrow we'll have a subtropical storm. But
now, would they give that a name?
If it was
a
yeah, it gets a name. They used to keep a separate thing. They not a separate list of names, but I think they used to use the Greek alphabet years ago. They would do they thought something was subtropical. They would just like subtropical storm alpha, subtropical storm beta, and then they finally just one year they just said no more of that. I think sometime in the 90s they said no more of that. If it's subtropical, you give it a name. It's too confusing to have two different, categories. And I guess that makes sense. Joe Mayano hitting super chat. Thank you, Joe, and saying go Giants, and a cigar for me. But I will just tell you that, I've got my Giants scarf that my friend Duke gave me, and I'm wearing it here just like a priest would wear it over his cassock. But I actually have. I don't like when a team with a good record faces a team with a mediocre record. You always have to be nervous, and
yes.
the Jaguars are nervous. And the thing is, when a team the team with a mediocre record can put together a game where it looks like they're going to the Super Bowl, and they'll meet a team that has a good record or even an unblemished record, and give them their first loss. So I'm a little bit nervous about today's game, and the Giants are actually underdogs today, believe it or not. So the bookies may be telling you something with the point spread.
We saw that in baseball, Joe. 111 wins for the Dodgers, and they were out in the first round. I mean, if you have a team that does not have a very good record or not an outstanding record, and they get hot,
yeah,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether or not they don't have a great record in the overview scheme of things. If they get hot at the right time, they can take on anybody and beat anybody. And I'm saying that maybe in our lifetime, Joe, we're going to see, I don't know, in football or especially in baseball, we're going to see just such a situation where a team with a mediocre record, maybe even there might be in the playoffs a team that has more losses than wins. Let's say a record of 80 and 82, and that team somehow makes it into the playoffs and just steamrolls right through the entire playoff round and wins the World Series. So the world champions would have a team that would have a record with more losses than wins. It could happen. It may happen. And that's why I agree with you with the Giants game today that sometimes, you look at the record and you say to yourself, well, the team with the better record may not necessarily be the team that's going to come out the victor at the end of this day. We'll see. And it sounds so funny, doesn't it, Joe? It sounds so funny. All those years in the past, the Giants and the Jets, one of the worst teams in football. down like cellar dwellers or bottom. And all of a sudden now, both New York teams are running with better with more wins than losses, and the Giants 5-1. I mean, you wouldn't have expected that at the beginning of the season, and now here we are speculating about, oh well, a team that may win today against the Giants with a lousy record or whatever. it's,
No,
it's strange. It's weird.
it is. It is. All right. I don't have a Briller Jeopardy. Do you?
I don't think so. I think
All right.
we have I know that Mr. Briller has asked if Miss Renata will come on next week and do a special Halloween Briller Jeopardy. So that's something we'll discuss. No, I do not have a Briller Jeopardy. I do want to say one thing, Joe, and I was totally unaware of it, and especially I'm kind of ashamed because I'm usually into aeronautics and that sort of thing, astronomy and space. Watching CBS this morning, Sunday morning, I learned of the death of James McDivitt, who was an astronaut both in the Gemini and also the Apollo programs. And you say to yourself, how could something like this happen? He got such short shrift. Like I said, I didn't even know it. Renata had heard about it, but I mean, like, it's a death that got kind of swept under the rug, so to speak, and that's sad because James McDivitt, in case none of you are aware who he was was on Gemini 4. That was the mission that had Edward White make the first first American spacewalk. The Russians had beat us to the punch in that regard, but the first time any American actually stepped out of his space capsule and did a spacewalk, that was Ed White, but he did it with the able assistance of James McDivitt. In fact, McDivitt had to call White and say, I know you're having a lot of fun out there, but you got to get back into the space capsule. And he had trouble getting back into the capsule because it was a tight squeeze, a tight fit. But McDivitt was able to get him back in. And then Apollo 9, everybody knows Apollo 11 was the first flight to the moon, but Apollo 9 was the first time that the lunar module had ever been tested in space, where they actually separated from the command module and actually flew freely in space around the Earth, not around the moon. And they tested all the functions of the lunar module before they finally said, okay, it's safe. Now we're going to head for the moon on Apollo 10 and Apollo 11. And who was one of the pilots on the lunar module flight? The very first one was James McDivitt. So he passed away on October 13th, 93. God love him. He lived a long, full life. And this was one of the greats. This was one of the pioneers of space, and it was sad that he passed. But I think it's sad that he didn't get more coverage in the aftermath of his passing away. Like I said, I had no clue that he had passed on. But somebody of that caliber and somebody who really helped start the space program and made it what it is today. James McDivitt, again, 93 years old. And Mr. McDivitt, we salute you.
Yes, we do. Timothy Veltman brings up this. Thanks for reminding me, Timothy. The other big question, I think it's a very big question and a big unknown, is the eruption of the Hunga Tonga or the Tonga Hunga. I don't know which way it's the explosive eruption that happened that sent that big cloud of water vapor into the stratosphere. That to me is the big unknown as to what impact that is going to have in the longer term. So another thing to maybe look for. Maybe there'll be some folks that are into the long range. Maybe Judah Cohen, Dr. Judah Cohen, may someday maybe he'll talk about that, or maybe some other folks to give some clues as to what that might mean in the longer term. Leon Probitsky hitting super chat. Thanks, Leon. Hope you have a good Sunday. And
well, I'll tell you what, Joe. In terms of the volcanic activity and whether or not there's an extensive cloud of ash and dust, an aerosol cloud, we may learn that in just a couple of weeks. We have a total lunar eclipse coming up, a total eclipse of the moon on the morning of November the 8th, Election Day morning, by the way. And we often look at lunar eclipses when they enter totality and see how the moon looks when the atmosphere is very clear and there is no major cloud or ash or dust in the atmosphere. The moon lights up like almost like a copper penny. But if there's a lot of schmutz up there blocking the red rays, the rays that we see at sunrise and sunset from being bent or refracted into the shadow of the Earth and onto the lunar surface, if there's a lot of schmutz up there blocking those rays from reaching the moon, then the moon will be rather dark, more like a grayish color, and sometimes it even blacks out. And sometimes, depending upon what hemisphere has the most schmutz, I've seen eclipses, for example, where the top part of the moon shines brilliantly, like a beautiful color, but the bottom part, because of the fact that it was more cloudy and more schmutzy with more volcanic haze, was almost black. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to the moon on November the 8th. And by looking at that, the moon acts as a probe, an atmospheric probe, if you will, testing out the clarity of the atmosphere. So if we see in this eclipse coming up on November the 8th, the bottom half of the moon abnormally dark or even black, that may be a suggestion or a sign that if not in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere has a lot of that schmutz. And if it turns out more dark all over the moon's surface, that may indicate that some of those particles spewed by the Tonga volcano has reached into the northern hemisphere as well, and may give us a better clue, a better sign as to what we might expect for this upcoming winter season.
All right. So on that note, let's call it a day. Football starts in a little while, so everybody have a great Sunday. Joe and I will be back tomorrow night at 7:35 p.m. Eastern Time. So set your set your calendar for the Joe and Joe Weather Show. And Mr. Rayo, we'll see you tomorrow.
We'll be here. Thanks a lot for watching, folks.
Bye, everybody.